It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 77, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Kristen Kordet farms 7 acres of vegetables at Blue Moon Community Farm in Stoughton, Wisconsin. With small-scale, certified organic tractor-based production, Blue Moon Community Farm markets through hyperlocal CSA as well as a farmer's market in the city. Kristen shares how she leveraged the organic certification process and the birth of her son to create systems that improved employee engagement to contribute to the farm's success. And we discuss how her work schedule has evolved to support a sane and full life beyond the confines of the vegetable fields. We also get into the history of the farm, including Kristen's decision to take on debt and transition to full-time farming, and how Blue Moon's market developed and matured with the farm. Kristen tells us about the market style on-farm pickup that has helped her increase customer loyalty and make her farm irreplaceable in the highly competitive CSA market in the Madison area. By the way, readers of Edible Madison magazine chose Blue Moon Community Farm for a Local Hero Award in 2015, and I can see why. Kristen brought a ton of value to this episode, and I know that you're going to get a lot out of it. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high-quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is also brought to you by you. We've got 3 new ways for you to support the show. I'll have more information for you at the break, or you can just head straight on over to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate if you can't wait. Kristen Kordet, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So glad that you could join us today. I'd like to get started by having you tell us a little bit about your farm, kind of give us the lay of the land, Blue Moon Community Farm, where it's located, how many acres you're farming, where you're selling your product.
Sure. Yeah, we are a small farm. We're 10 acres in size. As far as the land that we own, we're just about 12 miles south and east of Madison proper. And so we are situated kind of right on the edge of the city there. And when we were looking for a farm, we certainly had hoped for more acreage than we now own, but it's turning out to work out pretty well as far as the kind of business that I ended up running. Right now we have a CSA program that serves 175 families per week. We have about 300 families involved in the program through various ways. And then we do kind of a high volume farmers market in Madison, the West Side Community Market, which is not the downtown market, but there's lots of great markets around the city. And then we do a little bit of restaurant sales, but that's been something that we stepped back from in the last few years and really focused much more on the CSA and the market.
And how many acres are you actually farming then of the 10 acres that are on your land?
Yeah, so we have about 6 tillable acres on our land, and then I rent another 5 acres from our neighbor, so it's adjoining property. And of that, we have just about 7 acres in production each year. And so we're cover cropping some of our land for full seasons, and just about all of the land sees a cover crop at some point during the growing season or during the winter months. And so that's grown in size, very, very slowly over time. We're in our 14th CSA season, and we started on 2 acres, and now we're settling on 7. It's sort of a long-term right size for me.
And do you have a long-term lease on that 5 acres that you're renting?
No, that's a bit of a challenge. I don't. It's been an agreement that we've had, not even in writing, all the things that they say you shouldn't do necessarily. And we've rented it each year by verbal agreement. And the owner of the property actually passed away a couple of years ago. And we've been leasing from his son, and we're hoping to purchase that acreage. And he said sort of casually that he'd be interested in that, but that's as far as the conversation's gone. So I certified that land in 2010. And so it's seen quite a bit of organic management, organic inputs, quite a bit of sweat, labor into creating some really great production on that land. And I'd hate to see it fall out of our hands, and hopefully it won't. But quite honestly, it's a piece that no one else probably wants because it's landlocked and adjoining our farm. And so we have that going for us.
Those nice little corners that we can take advantage of as vegetable growers that don't
Right.
really work in a corn and soybean situation.
Exactly.
So you said your farm is certified organic.
Yes.
Who do you certify with?
We're certified through MOSA.
Through most of the Midwest
Mm-hmm.
Organic Services Association.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. And I'm curious, I mean, a lot of people would say that for, doing a CSA farm and a farmer's market as the cornerstone of your business, that the certification really isn't necessary. You know your customers, they know you. Why did you choose to certify?
Well, I started out my CSA and farmers market business in 2004 without being certified. This was on a rented piece of property before we purchased the farm that the business currently resides on. And I really didn't think there was a need for certification. I had a very small business. It seemed overly cumbersome. I knew my customers directly. All of the reasons why certification just seemed like not the highest priority. But over time, the market changed. Certainly, the Madison market changed, and I really started to feel that certification was going to be something that was going to be important to communicating what our production values were on the farm. And quite honestly, it was a process that I think a lot of people go through and come out the other side saying, I'm a much better farmer having gone through it. And I think about that process of certifying our production and our land as one of the most important things that brought much needed record keeping, much needed systems to the farm that helped make it successful. It really was a big part of that trajectory.
So you hear that a lot from people that have gotten certified organic. They'll say it helped me be a better farmer. And I understand from the record keeping side, just being conscious of what's going on your farm. But I'm curious, you said other systems. What else is it about being certified organic versus just growing organically that helps you be a better farmer?
For myself, it required me as a small farmer to involve other people in the systems of the farm in a way that they were not before. I was attempting to manage pretty much all aspects of the farm myself, which often, or more times than I would care to admit, meant that they weren't being managed as well as they should have been. And so things like scouting for pests, things like keeping up with a spray regimen if we decided to go forward with one, making sure that cultivation was done in a timely manner. Some of those things would just slip through the cracks, and I was trying to keep up with the management and operate with as lean a crew as I possibly could in those early years when money was tight, and you just flew by the seat of your pants. I think a lot of people did that, and so it was part of the development of the farm that in order to maintain the kinds of records and the type of production that I needed to in order to comply with the rules and have a good inspection and make sure that my I's were dotted and my T's were crossed, it meant involving other people in that process. And that in itself sort of pushed me toward creating systems of management that involved other people on the farm and more eyes on the crops and more people being able to take in and identify when we have an issue that needs to be addressed.
With your 7 acres of production, then, how many other people do you have working on the farm with you?
Well, at this time of the year in July, we have 6 full-time employees in addition to myself. And I should say that I run the business as a sole owner manager. My husband, who also lives on the farm, doesn't farm with me. So it's myself plus 6 full-time employees and 1 part-time right now. We also have a crew of worker share CSA members. We have about 10 people who join us for a few hours a week doing anything from weeding in the fields to helping at our distribution. All of our CSA members collect their share here at the farm, and so we have worker shares who help out with that. We have sitter shares who take care of my 3-year-old son in exchange for a CSA share. So lots of different people are involved in small ways on the farm. But we'll start to taper off that full-time crew come September. We'll be down to 4 full-timers by the end of September, and we'll be down to about 2 full-time equivalents by November, and by December we're pretty much out of work.
Do your employees come back year after year, or is it really a seasonal situation?
Well, that's been a real challenge, having a farm that's of a size that I can't really employ people through the winter. I end up having a 2 or 3 month period where I can't offer any work. And so I've been really lucky in the last 5 years or so that I have had returning employees who have come back for 2 or 3 years. And so this year, for instance, we have 4 people who are returning for another year, one of whom has been with me 4 years, and the others have been with me 2. And then we have a couple of new people as well. And so every year it's a mix of returning folks and people who have been with the farm. And it's a real challenge because everybody knows what an expense of time and energy it can be to train in new employees, and particularly if you're entrusting some management tasks to them, that trust is not built overnight. And so that time period of getting to know one another and our work styles is, it's an investment. And hopefully, if we have a good relationship, we can continue to work together for a while. But without year-round work, that's not an easy thing to ask.
I think a lot of people know that the Madison area is, it's thick with organic vegetable farms. I mean, you really can't turn a corner here without running into somebody. And I know sometimes even just driving out in the country, you run on to organic vegetable farms almost everywhere. And there must be a lot of competition for good employees.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think in some ways we're very lucky because we're so close to Madison that we have a labor market that's pretty good size right there, that we don't need to feel compelled to, say, offer housing on the farm because people can find housing easily in the surrounding communities. But it does mean that we get a lot of inquiries from, say, folks who the university is full of people who want to dip their toes in the water of farming, and we don't seem to get a lot of serious applicants from people who want to pursue farming as a vocation, and that can be really difficult. Parsing out who is really interested in learning the nuts and bolts of farming versus someone who thinks it would be really fun to work on the farm for a summer. We need those folks too, but those relationships can often go sour when the farming gets tough, or when you have a 95-degree day, or when someone suddenly realizes they don't like working outside as much as they thought they would.
Right, and we're right in the middle of a heat wave right now here in Madison. So I imagine this, it's this kind of weather that really makes people think like, ugh. Right. I don't know if I really want to do this.
Yeah, these are the testing days. We encounter so many people in the community who say, "Isn't it wonderful that you get to spend every day outside?" And we say, "Yeah, it is wonderful, but think about it. We spend every day outside, regardless." And so it's a bit of a blessing and a challenge to be close to Madison, and I do feel that overall it is a blessing because we have always had a good competitive pool of applicants for our positions, and I know that's not the case for a lot of farms that are in the more remote areas and rural areas to find good labor. So I feel like we're very fortunate in that regard.
Now, one of the other hallmarks here in the Madison area with so many farmers, especially if you're choosing to do something like a CSA program, is there's a lot of competition here.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's an amazing number of CSAs in the Madison area for the size population that we have. And I have to say, it's because of our farm size and because of the type of program that we run. I think we've been a bit insulated from that, although I feel like every year this is going to be the year that we're going to start to struggle because we just don't know what the market is going to do. But our CSA clientele largely comes from our closest communities around us. So even though we're 12 miles from Madison, very few of our CSA members reside in Madison. We have 3 communities that are within 5 miles of the farm: Stoughton, McFarland, and Oregon. And most of our CSA members come from those communities. And so we've been very, very lucky to be able to draw on our very local surroundings. And because everyone comes to the farm to pick up their shares on the same day, it's much more of a gathering place. And I think it's an experience that's a little bit more difficult to trade out for another CSA. It's a little bit more of a unique experience for the CSA members, and that's led to our being able to retain our members year after year. We tend to have a fairly high retention rate, and I think that has a lot to do with it, is that people develop those direct connections, and they're having experiences on the farm that are different from picking up a box, and no matter how more convenient that might be than having to schlep out to the farm, it's an experience that they're wanting and coming back for year after year.
Well, and I remember back in college when I took Psychology 101, one of the things they talked about was that the harder something was, the more people tended to be committed to it. It's why you haze people into a fraternity or into another situation, because that actually increases the level of commitment. And I would imagine that coming to the farm week after week after week is engaging, and it increases people's level of commitment. Plus the fact, if you're saying that most people are coming from communities that are very close to your farm, rather than even driving the 20 minutes that it might take to get there from Madison, that there's not other farms that can duplicate that service.
Right, or certainly there are very few of them right now, and so we've been very fortunate in that, and yeah, I think that the CSA membership has become sort of a self-selected group of people who are looking for that instead of the convenience of other types of distribution, because there's certainly a place for that in the scheme of CSA options too. And it's kind of the fun thing of CSA is you can put your own spin and your own twist on it. But I started my farming experience in upstate New York, where it seemed to me that having more of an interactive, we call it a market style distribution, where we're not packing boxes, but people are actually loading their own bags when they're coming to the farm. This very interactive way of distributing the share was very common there. And so when I moved to the Midwest, looking for a job and wanting more experience on farms, I was surprised to see that there was a different dominant pattern of distribution that people have adopted here. And I think it's become much more the case on the East Coast as well. But at the time that I was working out there, this other model was very prevalent.
So tell me about how your on-farm pickup works.
Yeah, so every Wednesday during the season, between 3 and 7, all of our members come to the farm, and we set up in an overhang in front of our barn. We set up long benches with bins of all of the different items that are available that we can share. And above each bin, there's a sign that says what it is and how many to take. And so occasionally there's a choice of 2 different things if we have a small harvest of something. Sometimes it'll say, take all you want if we have an enormous quantity of something. And so people check themselves off on the sheet at the beginning, and then they bring their own shopping bags, or we'll provide bags for them, and they go down the line and collect up their share. And then at the end, we have a little bin. We call it the take it or leave it bin. A lot of CSAs do that, where they can leave behind things they know they won't use, or take extra of something that someone else left behind. And so then they've collected the share that we've harvested and washed and packed for them, and then they have the option of visiting our U-pick areas. So we have a few areas of the farm that we've opened up to the members. The most consistent and the most popular are the flower gardens, which are right in the barnyard next to our barn where we distribute. So people pick bouquets to take with them. And then we have an herb garden on the edge of our production fields, and they can go visit the herb garden and pick additional herbs if they need anything for the week. And then later on in the season, we have soft tomatoes and cherry tomatoes and pickling cucumbers and things for preserving that we also open up to the membership for picking as part of their share. And so there comes a point in the season when it gets fairly chaotic. If you've ever come to our farm, it feels rather suburban. We've got very close neighbors. We're sort of farming our neighbors' backyards because we own this remnant of an old farmstead where the road frontage was sold off as lots long ago. And so you drive up into our barnyard, and it can be a little chaotic when people are staying for an hour and a half to go and visit all the different areas where they can pick things. They're not, bouncing in and out in 10 minutes. And so we actually have to have one of our volunteers sort of direct traffic at that point of the season. So there's definitely some difficulties with the system, but we've made it work as best we can. And people are very patient and understanding. We're very much a working farm, although I try more and more each year to make the farm a little bit more public friendly. I don't want to be a manicured, mown space the way that, maybe some members might hope it to be, but I want it to look a little nicer and make it a little easier for people to get around or push their strollers over to the herb garden. And so we're trying to make those types of improvements, which is something I sort of resisted at first, but the membership is they're so committed to the farm, and they love being there, and making it a more beautiful place for them to spend time has definitely become a much higher priority for me over the years.
What are some of the other things you've done on the farm to make it a family-friendly, member-friendly environment?
Well, we have a kind of a philosophy that our farm is your farm. And so we really do encourage members to come out and spend time. If they want to come out to the farm on a different day, which many people do, they just have to let me know they're coming, and they can spend time out here. They can have lunch at the picnic table. Their kids can play on the jungle gym while the parents pick veggies. And we try to make it as sort of casual within some boundaries as we can, so that people can really kind of feel like it's their farm. We raise a small number of livestock, which is very much motivated by members, particularly, the kids that come out to the farm. Their interest in seeing animals and visiting them and feeding them things and seeing what they like. And so we raise a few pigs, and we raise some chickens and turkeys. And that's a big part of many people's experiences when they come to the farm, is to visit the animals and see how they're growing and things like that.
So with members being so involved with the farm, have you gone the route of having a core group and those sorts of, very, I almost call it like a deep CSA sort of aspects to your farm?
I haven't, and I want to. I would like to go in that direction in the next year or two, to develop or maybe call upon some of our really long-term members to help sort of guide decisions, big picture decisions about the farm, and to just have, for me, sort of a sounding board. I think that's one of the real downsides to not being a true family farm, in the sense that I'm the primary, owner of the business, is that I don't have that sounding board all the time of people who are involved enough in the farm that they have opinions and they have ideas for what would make it better and what kinds of things they'd like to see. And so I would like to take things in that direction. It's funny. I in some ways I feel like the weekly contact that I have, because I staff the pickup every week from 3 to 7, so I'm always there, and I talk with a lot of people every single week. And having that level of contact every week, I feel like I get a lot of that anyway, but not at a time of the year or in a way that I can really channel it and contemplate it. It's usually more of a July, August, September time when my brain is a little bit fried, and so it would be great to bring those conversations into the off season.
You need one of these pocket notebooks like I carry around all the time, so that you can jot down all those ideas and then just throw them in a file that you can pull out in November and sit down and ponder at the appropriate time. So
I've been to so many of your workshops, Chris, and I leave so committed to so many of these systems. And I still have hope that one day I'm going to have the pocket notebook system and the file folder system set and ready to go. Maybe this will be my year.
So then you also do the farmers market over on now I'm here in Madison, so I'm going to say over on the west side of Madison. But you do a farmers market that's not the main big one that's around the Capitol Square, but is another kind of an ancillary, smaller market. But I think still a fairly active market over there on the west side of Madison.
Yes, yeah, the West Side Community Market. It's been a wonderful market for our farm. It started up in 2005, and I started vending there in 2006. And it's a high volume market. We sell a lot of produce there. We have wonderful, loyal customers. We started a market share program, which a lot of farms are starting to do now. So essentially a punch card system at the farmers market. And so we have 100 families who are part of the farm through that means. So those are Madison residents who are part of the farm. They can shop the stand as a debit to their card, and they can also come out and do the U-picking that's open to all of our members and come to our events and things like that. And that's been a great way. It's funny how many market customers you can have and see them every week. And it took them joining the CSA before I really got to know them and even know anything about them or their families. And I might have known their first name. I might not have. And so it's been a great way to get to know our market customers and kind of bring them into the farm in a different way. So I think those kinds of programs are just really great. And so that market has been a big part of our current scheme. It's about a third of our business right now, but it's also sitting on a piece of property that's slated for redevelopment. And so it's going to be moving to a temporary new location next year. So, we'll see how that affects things as far as the market traffic and the market volume. But I know many farmers who want to wean themselves off of farmers markets for as soon as they can, because there's a lot of markets that are difficult to make a living at, to make it worth your time and your travel and your investment. And this one really has. It has been a great market, and I hope it continues to be. But one of the strategies we've considered in thinking about the changes that are coming is, how can we continue to build the CSA as an alternative to the market should that happen. And I think for us right now, our CSA has room to grow. We have a wait list. We have a wait list every year, and I think that we could expand what we do. We would need to set up a separate or a second pickup day, because we cannot have another car come into our barnyard. That's our limiting factor right now.
And then you do restaurant sales as well.
Yep, just a little bit. When I first started my business, I was selling much more to restaurants and marketing to restaurants, and it was a wonderful way to get to know chefs, and they were great supporters of the business. But I learned over time that it's not something I'm very good at. I felt for our size, for our scale of farm, the needs of chefs and the needs of CSA members felt very different to me. If I was going to do a really good job of serving my chef customers, I needed to grow, 15 to 20 things and grow them consistently throughout the year. But for CSA customers, I need to grow more than that and have a nice rotation of things, because they don't want Napa cabbage every week, but the chefs do. And so there was this kind of pulling in two directions. And on our scale and at our level of production, I reached a point where I felt like I had to make a choice. And so we went in the direction of CSA and keeping that diversity, whereas I know other small farms who made the opposite choice and are doing very well, dropping their CSA program and serving chefs instead. And so I think it also has to do with personality and the kinds of relationships that you feel most comfortable with. And I felt that my relationships with my CSA customers, that was where I felt most comfortable. I I just felt like that was what fit best with the personality of the farm and the kind of farm that I wanted to run.
With the 7 acres of production then that you've got, and having geared that mostly towards the CSA and the farmers market rather than towards the restaurants, can you tell us about what kind of a production system you're using there? I mean, I feel like 7-acre farms back in the early 2000s seemed to be a fairly common occurrence. Now, it feels like a lot of people are doing kind of 20 acres and up, or else they're doing the 2 acres or less kind of JM 40A style thing. You're sort of stuck solidly in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I am. And I do think for the system that we've established, for our farm, it is a sweet spot. It might not be for every farm. Every farm has its own equation of resources and what sort of output and production it needs to have in order to make everything work. And also, again, coming back to like the personality of the farmer, I knew that I wanted to be on a tractor. I wasn't going to try to farm in the sub-tractor scale. But I'm also not a mechanic, and I'm not a tinkerer. And so the equipment that I had needed to work well, or I needed to have people around me that can help fix it, and there couldn't be too much of it. And so knowing those things, and having spent time on farms where I was, I got used to using certain pieces of equipment that I really liked, I started building the farm toward the scale that I knew I could manage and that I knew I would feel comfortable in. And so I always kind of had that idea of in that 5 to 8 acre range was where I would probably end up. And so we have a system of production that's set up for mechanical cultivation. We have a cultivating tractor. We seed with a tractor. With tractor-mounted seeders. We do all of our transplanting by hand, but spaced on the beds in a way that we can mechanically cultivate. But we do have tools that have come in handy on our scale as far as root digging and plastic laying and other types of bed preparation tools and things like that. But we're not heavily mechanized. There's a lot of hand labor. And it's come down to having, plenty of worker shares on hand and getting better and better at controlling weeds so that we're not in the fields hand weeding, hand cultivating as much as we were in the beginning. And so getting better at growing on the same scale has made us more productive on the same acreage. It's kind of funny. I had an interview with some assistant managers that I ended up hiring back in 2013. And they joke with me when I talk to them because I told them at the time that we have 100 CSA members and that's about what our acreage can support. And so that's where we're going to stop. And we every year added members. And now this year we have 180 and we're farming the same acreage. And our production is just increased every year on that same acreage. And so we're getting better at what we're doing. Our soil's getting better. We bought a pretty worn out farm. And so, building soil, churning in cover crops, putting down as much materials and fertility as we can to help just build that soil back up it's really begun to pay off.
So I'm interested when you talk about going from 100 CSA members in 2012 to now 180 families that are picking up every week here in 2016, and that coming from being more productive on the farm. I mean, how does that actually work? You're still putting out the same number of head lettuces per row. How do you actually go about that increasing of your productivity?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've gotten better at planning. I've gotten better at planning. So we have so little waste on the farm. There's so little that we grow that isn't sold. And that comes down to tweaking your numbers year after year of, we need to grow fewer beans. We need to grow more cauliflower. We need to grow, we need to tweak these numbers so that our proportions of vegetables in our successions are better in line with what our needs are. And so making those tweaks over time, better weed control, direct translation into better yields in a lot of those crops, whether it's beets or carrots or salad mix or spinach, things like that have really benefited us. Overall, just overall size yields. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's looking at our onions this year and saying, my God, I've never seen such big onions. And so, there's just, we're having really nice production in a really wide range of growing conditions, which to me indicates that we've built some resilience into the system and we can handle a variety of situations. And so, in 2012, when we had the drought and the extended periods of really hot weather, we were not fully equipped to irrigate our acres, having just 7 acres, but working everything off of a house well with a pretty low volume. We were not set up to cope with a set of circumstances like that. And this year, even in just the short spells of dryness and the heat that we've had, I feel entirely different that if we had an extended drought, we could handle it. It would be fine. I mean, it would compromise things to some extent, things that don't like that heat, but we could certainly keep the water on our crops. And so that is a good feeling that we've made those kinds of changes. And that directly translates into, stress and just the overall energy that goes into trying to manage for things, for the unknown. We have fewer unknowns, more predictable patterns of activity to get that production. So just overall experience over time, I guess, on the same piece of land gets us there.
So to dig a little bit deeper into your production systems, you're using tractors then for your tillage and for your cultivation. How wide are your beds? What kind of wheel spacing are you on?
Yeah, we have 60-inch centers, so 5-foot beds, and we grow most of our crops. Well, I wouldn't say most. We grow some crops on 3 rows, 15 inches apart, and some crops on 2 rows, 30 inches apart, and then some 1-row crops. And those are the spacings that our cultivation system is set up to handle. And so everything is planted so that it can be mechanically cultivated. We have several tools on our tractor that we can use, from a basket weeder to beet knives to Danish tines, hilling discs, whatever the crop might demand. So most things are everything is mechanically cultivated, and some things don't get hand weeded at all. That always feels like a triumph when we can harvest a crop that we didn't have to touch before that point.
It's always so nice when that happens.
Yeah.
What kind of cultivating tractor do you have?
I have a Case 265 offset high clearance tractor. So it's got a little bit more capability than, say, a G or something quite a bit smaller. We can run PTO equipment on it. We can, run a small mower if we need to. We use it for all of our spraying if we're going to do some pest control with it, which is great because it drives over some rather tall crops. And so it's used quite a bit on the farm.
And then how big of a tractor do you have for doing your tillage work?
We have a 60 horsepower hydro, 84 hydro, an international. So it's a 40-year-old tractor that's kind of fit the bill for us. There's been a few occasions where I wish it was a little bit bigger, but for the most part, it's the right size. It's just big enough to pull our plastic mulch digger, which is also our carrot digger and our sweet potato digger and all those other things. Just enough horsepower to get us through the beds. And we have rather heavy soil, so that is a big factor in that too. Just big enough to pull a 3-tine chisel plow. And then a 6-foot tiller is what we use for a lot of our bed preparation. And so we have an assortment of other tools that we use for it. And it may be in the cards in the future to have a bigger tractor on hand, or to rent time on a tractor to do some deeper tillage, because I think that's something that's affecting our weed control. Some of our perennial weeds is our ability to do good subsoiling in our soils and get some better drainage and better aeration deep down.
So I'm going to take that as an opportunity with the perennial weed management, because I've read an article that was recently published in Edible Madison magazine, and they actually mentioned that you struggle with some Canada thistle on your farm.
Yes, we do. Yeah, we do. It's, I sometimes when I'm feeling, when I'm feeling the need to deflect blame, I will tell people that our farm was fallow, was completely uncropped for the year when it was for sale before we purchased it, and it did grow a ton of thistle, which our neighbors said went to seed and then got to continue its cycle and continue to grow. But in actuality, we certainly are doing things to spread it around and perpetuate it too, as much as we're trying to eradicate it. A growing crop is a very poor place to try to eradicate a weed like that. And so we've gone to, it was in conjunction with a research trial that a researcher at the University of Illinois was looking for participants to do some on-farm trials using sorghum Sudan to control thistle. And so this is one of the things that we do with our fields. Our fields are about a half an acre in size, with several of our fields each year, is put them into a full season of cover crop and attempt to control the thistle. So we identify our worst fields, and the regimen that the researcher recommended that seems to work, at least in the short term, is to disc or to shallowly till those fields at least once or twice in the spring. And then at the beginning of June, do a full bed preparation and drill in sorghum Sudan and let that grow up. And when it gets to about 4 or 5 feet tall, you mow it and let it grow again, and it sort of mulches itself with all of that material and also tillers and starts to grow thicker and more densely in the field. And then you let it grow to about 4 feet again, and you mow it, and you might mow it 3 times over the course of the season. And then, of course, the winter kills, and you till it under either late season or early the next spring. And we've seen a huge reduction in the thistle population after doing that for a year. It means taking your land out of production for a whole year. But I figure from our experience that we can get 3 good years of greatly reduced thistle population before we might see things kind of creep in again. It doesn't mean it's gone entirely, but it's probably 10% of what it was. It's pretty amazing. And so we've tried to do that on as many of our fields as we can. And of course, the 3 years go by, and you've got to start that rotation again. And so it's what keeps me primarily from cultivating more of our acreage on an annual basis, because we can work cover crops into our rotation without taking a full season off, but we really can't control that thistle without doing that.
Well, I think it's one of those things that points to why it's so important to have, if you can make this work with your farming system, those extra acres, because organic farming is basically a biological system, and biology takes time. It is an important component in management. And if you don't have enough land so that you can fallow some stuff, you're really missing an important tool in your toolbox.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But it makes it such a difficult choice. For us right now, I would love to have a little more land. I would love to have a bit more room for expansion, or to just grow a little bit more of those space-intensive crops. Right now, for our CSA distribution, we purchase in potatoes and we purchase in sweet corn, because we just don't have the space. We need to grow higher value crops on our acreage, and the amount of space we would need to devote to those to meet the needs of our CSA would be just far more than we could afford. And so, it is. It's something you have to keep reminding yourself that this is worth it, and this is part of what we're doing here to steward the land, is to make sure things stay in balance. And it's meant that I can support other growers in the area, and that part I've really enjoyed, to be able to be able to tap some of the best growers of certain crops and say, hey, let's put these in the CSA share, and then I feel everyone wins.
So, Kristen, we're at a spot now where we should stop and take a break, get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back with Kristen Kordet from Blue Moon Community Farm.
The Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, makers of living potting soils for organic growers since 1992. In the transplant greenhouse, all of your investment in plant material, heat, labor, and overhead depend absolutely on the performance of the media where you expect your plants to grow. And that media has a really hard job to do: produce a healthy plant in just a few cubic centimeters of soil. When I started farming, I focused on getting the cheapest ingredients I could to make my own potting soil, and later on finding cheap potting soil already put together. But I found out what so many farmers have, that saving money on inputs doesn't always result in increased profits. Jennifer at Vermont Compost can tell story after story of customers who switched to less expensive options, but who have come back to Vermont Compost for the consistency and the quality of their potting soils. And even though it's not all about saving money, Vermont Compost Fall Pre-Buy program can help you get what your plants need at the best price with the best shipping options. Don't miss out. Vermont Compost Fall Pre-Buy program runs September 21st to December 21st. Taking care of growers by taking care of transplants since 1992. VermontCompost.com. This week, the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by you, our listeners. And the nice thing about that is that I don't need to go on and on about it, because the fact that you're here probably means that you already think the Farmer to Farmer podcast is kind of cool. We've put 3 ways in place that you can directly support the podcast at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. First, you can become a patron of the show by setting up a monthly donation through Patreon, which is kind of like Kickstarter for ongoing projects. By providing ongoing support, your patronage allows me to put my energy where it's used best, on creating and producing a great podcast. Or you can do a one-time donation through PayPal, which would also be awesome. Third, if you shop on Amazon.com, use the link at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/Amazon to start your shopping session, and the podcast will get a percentage of what you spend. Go to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate for more information and all of the relevant links. Thank you so much for your support.
And we're back with Kristen Kordet from Blue Moon Community Farm in Stoughton, Wisconsin, which is just south of Madison, Wisconsin. So, Kristen, on your 7 acres and with this mix of farmers markets and CSA and a little bit of restaurant on the side, what do your gross sales look like in the year?
Well, they, luckily for us, go up a little bit every year. This year our income is budgeted to be about $270,000 off those acres.
So that's about $40,000 an acre. That's a pretty respectable yield for tractor farming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Congratulations on that.
Well, thanks.
And are you making a living off of that?
At this point, yes. Yes, I'm making a pretty solid middle income from the farm. It took however many, 13 years to get there. But
yep.
It's interesting. I was pretty determined in the beginning to start a farm business that I could walk away from at any point, which meant I didn't want any debt following me until I was absolutely certain that this was going to be what I was going to do. And so I spent the first 7 years of my business farming by day, cash flowing my expenses through farm sales and paying myself very little, waiting tables at night, and making things work that way while I was looking for, a permanent home for the farm. I was on rented land at the time. And then when I was able to find a farm to buy and was ready to make that commitment to say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to build this business with an eye toward permanency. That's when I felt a little more comfortable going out and seeking financing. And so I got an FSA loan to jumpstart the move to our permanent farm. It helped finance, hoop houses, greenhouse, tractor, equipment, a new well. We needed to install a new well and things like that in order to set up the farm, modest as it was, for growth and production. And so, at that point in time, I was still making a very modest income from the farm. But once I had those essentials in place, that's when we were able to start earning an income directly from the farm. And I was able to leave my off-farm job, 7 years into running the business. And in 2013, I was expecting a baby in May, which was crazy. And I, for the first time, went and hired an assistant management team to help to run the farm, knowing that I wasn't going to be able to have the same role as I had before. And when I went into that process, I thought, well, this is going to be a year that I forfeit my income and hire people to run the farm, and then we'll recover from that and things will be fine. It turned out to be our most profitable year by far than any year that preceded it, which I tried not to take personally, but it really meant that, it forced me to create more of these systems on the farm that meant our production was in check. We were keeping on top of things. We were conscientious about our seeding schedules and making sure that everything was in line, and we had really wonderful production. And that's just continued every year as I've had these assistant managers on the farm. It's just been, I realize that I'm a team player. I really like having a group of people where we all have similar goals and we're deciding how to get things done. I mean, I'm still calling the shots, bottom line, but I need that sort of the camaraderie of a team to keep things moving. And I realized that over the last few years that's been a really big key to our farm's profitability.
So I'm really interested to know more about how that relationship works with what you just described, because when I read that you had a young child, and I was thinking, well, wow, because Kristen owns and runs this farm herself, and now you're telling me you had a baby in May, which means you're certifiably crazy. Yeah, and I mean, most farmers are a little bit crazy, but I mean, this is flat out wacko. And then you go and have your most profitable year ever. There's got to be more to that than just hiring somebody and saying, well, you're the assistant manager of greenhouse transplant production.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot more, and a lot of it had to happen. A lot of things that happened that year should have happened long before that year, but it was the birth of my son that really forced me to let go of some things that I didn't need to be holding on to so tightly. And it forced me to, again, create systems of communication, ways of organizing our work that could be more transparent to other people on the farm, that other people could pick up and run with. And I didn't need to be there. I could be missing from the scene and work wouldn't grind to a halt. And
so tell me about one of those. Let's pick one of those systems and kind of flesh it out. What was something then that you were holding on to tightly, you let go of, and then how did you what did you put in place to make the work, the communication more transparent to the other people who were involved in your absence?
Mm-hmm. Well, a simple thing that we started doing right away when I had assistant managers was, our weekly field walk, which so many farms do, but I never did it with any of my staff. And so we, the three of us, I had two assistant managers, walk the field for 2 hours every week on Monday and put together our work plan for the week, strategizing when things could get done and when, what projects are good to have our worker share crew put on, which things were higher priority than others. And we agreed upon a game plan for the week that obviously changes day to day, as we all know, and we would revisit that most mornings. But it gave everyone this roadmap for the week that, it sounds so simple, but we all know that it also means that everyone's invested in these outcomes on the farm, and no one is out there working not having any idea what comes after the thing they're doing. And so it creates that sense of urgency that we all wish for in a crew, that kind of keeps the fire under everybody to keep moving, because we have all these other things ahead. And when we can share in that plan, I think people are more committed to the farm. They're more likely to share observations, to use their own intuition about a situation they're seeing in the field. They're more observant in general. And because it's become part of our routine to be observant, to share what we're seeing and doing around the farm. And I think that kind of communication was really limited before. It was much more one way coming from me, and not always with outcomes that were positive, both in a management of production standpoint, but also in a management of employees and employee morale. I think it had a big effect on both of those things.
It's really interesting to me how when you create one small space where communication is both ways, like this field walk that you're talking about, how that kind of blossoms into more two-way communication during the rest of the week.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that when we have that opportunity to discuss things in that setting where we're not racing off to do another task, or my employees don't feel like they're stealing my time away from something that could be more urgent than what they have to tell me, it opens that up to nothing is off the table right now. Let me know what you're thinking. And that's had a big effect on really our ability to tackle problems, because I don't see everything. It's one of the downsides of stepping back a bit. Since the birth of my son, I don't actually see things as immediately as I did before. I rely very heavily on other people's observations. And so that's really important.
What kind of a work schedule do you and your crew keep at Blue Moon Community Farm?
We have a pretty set schedule. I could probably count on two hands in 2 years the times that we've diverged from our regular hours, and we start at 8:00 and we end at 4:30 every day in the spring and fall. And then in the summertime, we go crazy and we start at 7:45 and go to 4:30. Wow. I know, those are long days. And so, I mean, if I had thought that this were my work schedule 10 years ago, so 10 years ago, I was like, farming every possible minute until I had to go scrub my hands with bleach water to get the stain off of them so I could go, serve at a fine dining restaurant at night. I kept crazy hours. And even more recently than that, before my son was born, I would be regularly out, into the evening. And truth be told, I love being on the farm in the evening, and I love being on the farm by myself, which I almost never am now. in terms of, being in the field. I'm always surrounded by other people. And so I do miss that in some ways, but man, did it force me to get my act together and keep a schedule that was a little bit more sane than what I was doing before. And it works. I wouldn't, I don't know if I would have believed it if someone would have told me that. But it's okay. Farming is an endless list of tasks. And if you give it all your time, it's going to eat it all up. And you just have to prioritize to the time that you give it. And it turns out it works the same way, whether you're working 8 or 9 hour days or 13-hour days.
Well, there's some sort of a principle out there, and I don't remember whose name it's attached to, but the idea being that the work will expand to fill the time available.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I haven't given up, that I've been very reluctant to give up, and I feel like it's my next frontier, is I really, really like being at the market. And I'm there just about every week with the help of, other staff. But I really like that face time with the customers. I'm really, silly and anal about how the stand is set up, things like that I feel like I might be ready for a change and ready to try to hand that off to someone. But it feels like such a big thing to pass off.
Well, and your son's not soccer age yet. Once that happens, then weekends have an entirely different purpose than they do now.
So true. Yes.
So I'm not quite sure how to ask this, Kristen, and because I feel like this is one of these themes that keeps coming back on the Farmer to Farmer podcast is about people setting limits around the schedule that they're working on the farm. Creating ways of getting the work done in a time that they're choosing to allot to it, rather than just letting the farm have everything that it wants.
Mm-hmm.
On a nuts and bolts level, how do you go about restricting your work hours? I used to do this on my farm. We'd send the crew home at 4:30, and then I'd keep working for another 4 or 5 hours because there was work to do. And at a really functional level, how do you actually make that work?
Well, that's honestly a great example of the kind of thing that having my son at the time that I did forced upon me, and I was not happy about it. I was scared and concerned that the farm would be neglected if I couldn't be there for it when it needed me. And that continues to be a tension that I have, particularly this time of year when there are tons of things. I could name off 10 things that I'd love to run outside and do tonight, but I'm not going to do any of them. And that idea that there's things that need doing and I'm not going to do them and it's going to be okay is something that I was forced to come to terms with. I would love to be, if I needed to spray some Dipel or put some copper on the peppers, or I'd love to go out there at dusk or, later in the evening when it's cool and get that done. I don't do that anymore. I'm not on the farm in the evening. And that has meant that I have more staff hours on the farm than I otherwise would, because it means that the things that need doing on the farm have to get done. I might work till 5 o'clock, and then that's it. That's what I've got. And it just changes the scope of, what your list for the day looks like, what your priorities look like. And it's not all stuff that I'm happy about necessarily. But I think that time has shown me that it's possible and you can still run a successful operation doing it. And I think I'm slowly coming to terms with the idea that these are not failures, that I don't need to feel terrible that I'm not out there. What I need to be doing and what I need to be reminding myself of is that this is time that I'm taking away from the farm. So take it away, take your mind away and your body and use it, with your family and doing the things that you need to maintain your life. And, when Cyrus gets older, that's my son, maybe the equation will change again. I don't know. It certainly has changed every year. When he was an infant and then came into, the 1-year-old year in the field, and now he's 3 and he is, he's an amazing, lovable guy, but he is also hell on wheels. He is just nuts. And so, there's a lot of maintenance there. And so I think, it's going to be, every year is going to be its own package from here on, and it's going to greatly impact my relationship to the farm every year. But what it's probably never going to mean again is that the farm is my everything, and I give it everything that I have. That chapter's over.
I think it's kind of interesting, and especially in the market farming world, you don't call it the Kordet farm, right? It's the Blue Moon Community Farm. And we give our farms these names that are something other than ourself. And so often we get tied up in them and we become the farm. And I think it's really interesting and I think rewarding to hear about you pulling back and establishing an identity for the farm that's something other than just Kristen Kordet's farm.
I think that's the biggest challenge, honestly, is feeling like that persona that you've built up is the farm, and how do you, what will happen? What's going to happen when you step away? And I think that's part of my fears, or I don't know, maybe my trepidation about having less of a presence at the farmer's market. Even on the few weeks of the year that I'm not there, I'll hear customers come up to me and say, "You guys weren't here last week." Well, of course we were there, but I wasn't, and that always concerns me. And but I do think that, having more people have meaningful roles on the farm, not just our staff, but we have so many just long-term worker share volunteers who are just part of the farm, and they have a way of personifying Blue Moon that's different from me, but it's all part of this thing that we're building, and that's become something that at first I was sort of uncomfortable with, because I don't know if every small business owner is a control freak, but I certainly was and probably continue to be, wanting to feel like you have your hands on everything, or at least what's going on in every aspect. And to some extent that's still true, but I'm much better at letting go and trusting the judgment and the talents of the people that are around me, because they're very talented and they have great judgment. And it's something that it provides huge benefits to the farm, to the business, to have them there.
On that note, Kristen, I'd like to take a turn and transition into our lightning round.
Oh boy.
All right. So what's your favorite tool on the farm?
Oh, the Johnny's little hand hoe. We have about 30 of them floating around the farm. Gotta love them.
These are let me say it again. So tell us about that, the Johnny's hand hoe.
It's got a short little handle and an angular blade, and you can be fairly close to the crop, but do a really precision cleanup job once the cultivating tractors come through, and we just love them. They make pretty light work of hand weeding.
What was the last purely recreational activity that you did?
Well, just this last weekend, I took a day off the farm, which was very exciting. I took Monday off, and my son and I, with some friends, went up to Sheboygan and spent some time on the dunes on the lake, and went to the botanical gardens and hung out for 2 days.
All right. Way to go.
In July.
That's so awesome. I love that.
It was awesome.
I love to hear that. So what made you decide to become a farmer?
I was in my undergrad studying environmental themes of various sorts, and I was also a dance major. I was studying modern dance. And at the time, I did not realize this, but later on when I was in the work world and being very frustrated, I made the realization that my mental self is very useless without my physical self being really stimulated. And so I was, working in fields that I thought were going to be where my interests lie. But when my body was stagnant, it just wasn't working for me. And I spent a summer on a farm as a way to clear my mind and figure out what I was going to go back to school and do. And all of a sudden, it just clicked for me. I was working so hard. It was so mentally stimulating. It was so physically challenging. It was a realm of work that I had zero experience. So I was just sort of knocked off my high horse of being, a good student, accomplished in what I had been pursuing, and just felt like I was starting from ground zero. And I really liked that challenge. And so I think, this was back in 1999, 2000, when I moved out to upstate New York and took an internship at Roxbury Farm. And that's really where the ball started rolling.
And your favorite crop to grow?
Ooh, garlic. We grow a lot of garlic. And it's just one of those crops that's so, it's such a signature of time passing on the farm. I love that way about it, when you plant it, the very last thing that you do in the fall, and it's one of the first green things to pop up in the spring, and it's just beautiful. It's such a beautiful crop to see hanging in the barn. Right now we've got all of our garlic laying and hanging to cure, and it's just gorgeous.
And if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
I would have definitely told myself to quit my job sooner. I started waiting tables when I started my business, thinking I would do this for a year or two until I got myself off the ground, and then quit. And I ended up being there 7 years because I was really nervous about taking that leap, even though the business was going well and things were happening, but it just wasn't something I was willing to do. And I look back at that time right after I did finally leave, and things just blossomed. Things exploded for me. I had the mental space and the time to really shape the farm into what I wanted it to be, and things just really took off after that. So I would have moved on much sooner.
Kristen, thank you so much for being on the Farmer to Farmer podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really feel like you brought a ton of value. And now, of course, people are listening to this anytime they want, but it's 4:55 here. You got to quit soon.
It's true. Well, as luck would have it, we quit at 2:30 today. Sometimes we get to leave early.
All right, so wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 77 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and you can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Kordet. That's Kordet. Don't forget, you can support the show by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate, or by starting your Amazon.com shopping session at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/Amazon. If you enjoy the podcast, I'll bet you would like to be on my email list, the Flying Rutabaga. You can check that out at farmertofarmerpodcast.com or purplepitchfork.com. Also, please head on over to iTunes, leave us a review if you enjoy the show, or talk to us in the show notes, or tell your friends on Facebook. We're at Purple Pitchfork on Facebook. Your reviews and referrals make a huge difference in our ability to reach out to a growing circle of listeners. One more thing. I appreciate so much all of the guest suggestions that I received through the suggestions form on farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Please let me know who you would like to hear from. I'll do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.